Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the All Things Interesting podcast. Before we kick things off today, I wanted to touch on a couple of things that I feel are important as a preface to the show itself. First off, you may notice that this episode is recorded in a linear Q&A fashion. This is due to some technical issues that we faced while recording the episode, and in some ways, I view it as an experiment for how some of my future episodes may be formatted as well. Secondly, as a disclaimer, the name of my guest has been changed so as to protect their identity. And lastly, as much as this episode is political in nature, my intention is to provide a platform for my guests to share their thoughts, stories, and opinions, irrespective of their positions. That said, my guest today is an individual who is a citizen of Hong Kong that has taken part in the 2014 umbrella protests and the now ongoing Extradition Bill protests. In our interview, he shares his thoughts on the protests, along with the perception of many citizens who are rising up for a more democratic government. Without further ado, please welcome my guest, Alex Chen. Hey Alex, welcome to the show. To kick things off, can you share a bit of background on who you are, some of your personal experiences in these protests, and briefly describe the current protests as well as what was the cause of them?
Okay, so first of all, I grew up in Hong Kong. I live in Hong Kong right now. When I was young, I was in China for like 6 years, and I moved back to Hong Kong. But well, I was born in Hong Kong. I studied in Hong Kong, and I got into a university, and now I work in one of the professional fields. So, about all the protests, it's almost start from um 9th of June, which I think is what most of people first joined the whole protest, but it was like there's like couple months that was before the whole protest starts. So the cause or why this kind of protest happens is because there is a resident in Hong Kong who's Chan Tong Kai, who committed murder to her girlfriend in Taiwan, and the Hong Kong authorities could not charge him for murder since it was done in Taiwan and there's no extradition agreement. So Hong Kong authorities cannot send back either for charges as well. So therefore, Hong Kong government proposed one in order to fix the loophole, what they call loophole, because Hong Kong government consider Taiwan as a part of China. So the whole extradition bill is uh, will be for the whole China part. But the so-called loophole was intended to made by the British government since um, we all know that the China's legal system is not sophisticated for Hong Kong to sign an extradition agreement, and a lot of the citizens in Hong Kong they do lack confidence towards China's legal system, and we heard a lot of different kinds of news, and they are all bad news in terms of the legal system in China. But China is using different kinds of charges to arrest people against their political stance. Like we have like a bookstore seller or owner that sells anti-China books, and he got arrested in I guess 2016 or 17 for complete random charges. So that's why um, we do not think that the extradition bill is really useful or can be performed in this way. Also, this is kind of move that harms one country two systems because under the bill the judges has no right to reveal the validity of the proof by the China. So it's kind of override the laws and judicial system in Hong Kong. Then that's why people start to concern about the bill and protest for withdrawal of the bill. And it was first started by a bunch of lawyers in March or in April, but then we have like a very huge protest in 9th of June, which marks a series of protests from now.
Now, living in Hong Kong and being on the ground level of everything that's going on, what's the latest information that you could provide on the protests?
So right now, Carrie Lam said she would propose to the Legislative Council for complete withdrawal of the bill, but yet no protesters were satisfied. Over 1,000 of protesters were arrested. Over 100 of protesters were charged for different types of criminal offense, and 9 people had committed suicide because of the bill, and no police was suspended because of the abusive violence and misbehavior conducted by those police on the protesters. On 31st of August, those special tactical squad, which is one of the special team in the police force, they chased the protesters onto a stationary train and used batons and also pepper spray on normal citizens, causing a series of injuries.
Thank you for sharing that. From an outsider's perspective, it can sometimes be difficult to really understand what is going on in situations like that. We only understand what we see on the news, and sometimes what we see can be a tailored version or a suppressed version of that. So I think it's important to bring awareness to some of the things that we normally wouldn't see as the international community. That said, everything starts at the top. And in this case, I wanted to turn the attention to Carrie Lam, who is the chief executive of Hong Kong. How do you feel about her current stance on the protests and the recent rumors that have surfaced of her attempts to resign from her current position?
I think the Carrie Lam and her government had a very firm stance on denying protesters' remaining demands. They recently had a leaking video recordings, which most of the protesters and also most of the citizens think that is a fake one, released by the government trying to fool people. We really don't believe in what she said, that she's sincere on communicating with the protesters. In fact, for those of you who might not know, Carrie Lam is very good at these kind of tactics to try to pretend she's weak, but then she could do all the other things, or she's a very aggressive person that will do whatever she wants with every cost. And these kind of tactics happen a lot throughout her work as a government officer. Like for example, there's like a very famous street in Hong Kong which we call Li Tong Street, which is famous for traditional wedding prints and also very unique in Hong Kong. In the time of 2003, which is like 15 years ago, there's development conduct, but without maintaining any of the original features, and they use bulldozers to completely remove everything, and that's what the government approach and what's Carrie Lam's approach because she was the head of the development bureau at the time. And at first, the bureau claims that the redevelopment would be suspended, but a month later, the people found that developers are removing it already. And the protesters were sitting in the streets and to avoid those bulldozers. And Carrie Lam was one of the protesters and pretend they're discussing with the protesters, but immediately told the media after discussing that the redevelopment must go on, and now it's became like a fancy street, but with high-end brands, but losing all the original features, which is not what a redevelopment should be. And also during the Umbrella Revolution, the government invites representatives to have like a closed door conversation, which couldn't be leaked to the public. But um, they resist during the so-called conversation. The government strongly resists to step back, and they strongly deny to listen to the protesters. And after that, the uh, amnesty was cleared, and most of the people who joined the meeting were imprisoned. And during that time, Carrie Lam was one of the officers that hold and suggest the closed door meetings. And also, she mentioned in one of her reasons that she would get to the community and try to listen to different voices. And we all think that these kind of moves is not really what she really meant. Like, she never tried to listen to our voices, and she just can't be trusted. And that's not just because she's the chief executive of the government and we don't trust her. It's because from the past experience, she really can't be trusted.
Now, as you may know, most, if not all, major protests have always had an influential figure. In this case, that figure is Joshua Wong. He is most well known for being one of the leaders of the 2014 umbrella protests, and even more recently as the face of the 2019 Extradition Bill protests. Can you share a bit more about him, as well as his influence among protesters and citizens?
Well, I think Joshua Wong first appeared in the national education event, which we seen it as like a brainwash educational courses from China to try to teach the secondary school students or high school students to love the country and also to not betray the country, something like that. And he's one of the representatives of the secondary school students who try to say that we don't want the course. And he's also one of the pioneers in the Umbrella Revolution for dashing into what we call the Civic Square, which is an area outside the government headquarters that was open to the public but blocked due to protests. He was then imprisoned for 2 months and released in 17th of June, which is uh, still, I think, like in the beginning or not really when the protest was heating up. And then he participated in the anti-extradition bill protest. Well, in terms of influence, I personally think that he does have influence in the international means because he's very famous, and I think like most of people may know him because of the Umbrella Revolution. But what we protesters think, and also what he said, is that um, we are just all one of the protesters, and there's no leaders in this movement. And the protesters generally had a very strong resistance of any kind of representatives because of the failure in the Umbrella Revolution, which we got some kind of so-called representatives and to have closed door conversation, like I said before, to the government, and we really disappointed about that. So we try to avoid any kind of representatives or leaders in this movement. And also, we strongly believe that each protester should represent himself or herself only. And in this movement, every protester must think of what he or she could do and what he or she want to do, and respect each one's independent critical thinking, and also support any act that's beneficial to protest. And I think this is one of the very core ideas in this movement that we've never seen in the past political movement in Hong Kong. Um, we don't want any kind of representatives or leaders to tell us what we should do. So, and also Joshua, he mentioned in his Facebook post that he's also one of the many as well. So, try to say that he's not taking the role of any kind of representatives because that's what we don't want. And it's kind of citizen-driven movement instead of what we used to have.
When the protests began, there were 5 specific demands outlined to the People's Republic of China. What were these demands?
Um, we do have the 5 demands we request from like very beginning of the protest. The 5 demands include to completely withdraw the bill and set up an independent commission to investigate the abusive violence used by the police for the whole 3 months, to completely withdraw the terminology of riots used on the protests during the 3 months, to release and discharge all the arrested protesters, and also we want a dual universal suffrage. And these 5 demands are our minimum requirement, and we have to have them all. We don't want to accept like just one and to give up other 4. We need all the 5, not one less.
A quote that stuck out to me by one of the protesters was, "When the police abuse their powers and face no consequences, a revolution is justified. I accept revolution and bloodshed. Revolution is war, and no war is without violence. If our violence can bring about positive changes, I am willing to be involved." Do you believe that Hong Kong is on the verge of revolution? And do you believe that a violent revolution is needed for there to be any change? Or can change be achieved through peaceful means?
Well, I strongly agree that Hong Kong is in the verge of the revolution, and we all have the same feeling of that. Carrie Lam states that she denies claims as well as the Communist Party, and like at this stage, we have no stance to lose because from what we've seen in the news about the education camp in Xinjiang, I think if we lose this movement, that could really happen in Hong Kong in a very short period of time. I mean, like within 10 years, that could happen in Hong Kong. And the police, they could have unlimited power. They could arrest any kind of people they want to for very simple reasons. If we just forgive the government and accept what we now have from the government, I don't think any of the people will forgive us. And we wouldn't ourselves forgive us as well. And also, even if there is anyone who died under the police, the Hong Kong people would dare to have raised a revolution. I mean, that's for sure. The situation is so worse right now that we think that there must be people who was killed by the police, and the situation is just so worse, and there is so much hatred toward the police, and this could happen at any time. I would like to add the point that like what I mentioned about all of the police using violence. If there is no abuse of violence used by police, then the protesters won't use any kind of force. Like the police is the cause of the whole set of violence. In 26th of July, I think it's the one of the very first airport assembly without any police there, and there's no police inside or outside the airport, and there's no violent acts from the protesters, and everyone was so peaceful, and there's no foreigners or tourists that felt disrupted or that felt violent. But on 14th of July, the police blocked all the exits and beating protesters in the shopping mall in Shati, which is not what they supposed to do. And also in 11th of August, a police shot a first aid girl's right eye to blind. And after that, they denied the accused, and they just said that there might be a chance that the protesters shot themselves, which was ridiculous. And even there are all kinds of evidence that says it's the police fault. they still strongly denied it, and they try not to investigate it. And also on 31st of August, which I think is one of the most terrifying incidents of all the movement, is that the police entered into the stationary train and attacked the citizens. And they claim that because the protesters pretend to be citizens, and saying that the act that they open the umbrella for self-defense is a violent act. When the first aid people volunteered by any kind of people, they try to rescue or try to do some medical treatment to the protesters. But then the police denied their request, and they force those first aid people to stand towards the wall, which is what we would do or what parents would do to punish their kids. And we couldn't believe that such kind of things would happen were used by the police. It was so ridiculous. And right now we're still asking the MTR to give us the CCTV to give us the truth what happened, because we really suspect that there might be people or protesters that were murdered by the Hong Kong police. And also on 27th of August, the police used a gun to point on protesters and heavily kick a citizen which already knees down to the police. Like these kinds of cases or incidents really shows that how abusive the police have been using forces on protesters, which is not even necessary. They were just beating protesters and also normal citizens with like no kind of weapons. All they have like mostly was just umbrellas. And also they turn a blind eye on the those pro-China violent act, and that's the reason why we have to arm up to take the weapons, because it's a very strong comparison where police or those pro-China people, terrorists, they had like all kinds of weapons and they are really armed up, and protesters they really basically just naked, and they only had like umbrellas, which was kind of useless when they're trying to block the police or other people's or other forces. For example, on 21st of July, there were hundreds of white shirt trials who attacked the citizens and other protesters in Yunnan Station. And at that time, the citizens called the police and got a reply that if you are afraid, just don't go out. And they turned a blind eye to the whole situation just because those white shirts trials were supporting the China, China, or not even supporting China. They beat the protesters, and that's what the police want. So that's why they turned a blind eye on it. And the two police arrived when the attack happened, but they did nothing and just turned back, and it cost them like 39 minutes for the police just go and deal with the situation. But at that time, no white shirt trials were arrested, and even photo shows that they were shaking hands. The police and the white shirt trials were shaking hands. It's a really strong evidence that the trials and also Hong Kong police they were united to beat the protesters, which is unacceptable because the police which was supposed to be government's force, and they were corrupt and they cooperate with the trials with commit tons of crimes and should be the one that was arrested and investigated by police, but instead of arresting they're cooperating. So we couldn't find like any kind of things that we could rely on. We could just rely on ourselves. So that's why we have to arm up and protect ourselves.
With international situations such as these, the media can sometimes magnify certain aspects while ignoring others. What do you think are some aspects of the protests that are not covered by the international media that we should bring more attention to?
Well, one of the things I noticed is that actually there are a lot of people who they put in all of their efforts, especially financial resources into the movement. I have a friend who spent already like $110,000 Hong Kong dollars in this movement, which to the extent that he even can't buy like food for themselves. They can't even have a proper meal. He only got like I think 20 Hong Kong dollars in his bank account. And also there are a lot of young age students, mostly students. They spend all of their money in the movement to buy the mask, to buy any kind of protection materials that they could use to the extent that they don't have other money as well. They have to chill a bread for dinner. But the pro-China people or the pro-China legislative councilors always said that we were taking money from CIA or other foreign forces. And I really felt like the statement was so ridiculous. You could just go on the streets and see like people just eating breads and also eating like or not even eating, but they were like using all of their money and they can't even go get a lunch or dinner. I really rather like the CIA could give us money so those young kids wouldn't be suffered from hunger. But it's not the truth. Like we never receive money from any kind of like foreign forces, and we don't think that any kind of foreign forces could support us for like 100 days. So it's a very wrong statement, and it's really the truth right now. But I don't think a lot of the press have been telling this side of the protest.
With Hong Kong and China being under a one country, two systems form of government, there's a lot of pressure and influence by the People's Republic of China to bring an end to the current protests. What role do you believe the PLA has played in the recent protests, and what role do you believe that they will play in the future?
My opinion is that already some of the PLA has been pretending to be Hong Kong police, which is not allowed because it states in the basic law that the PLA shouldn't be a part of the police forces. It's not authorized. But I mean, in the future, there would be more as than trying to pretend to be part of Hong Kong police. And there are a lot of evidence that show that the PLA has been camouflaged as the Hong Kong police to try to arrest or just beating the protesters. I don't think there will be a official command to ask those PLA to officially attack Hong Kong protesters right now, but we really don't know what's gonna happen next. But if they really come, we just hide and we just go back to our home. Just let them destroy Hong Kong. We don't think like Hong Kong right now worth preserving. Anyways, that's my opinion, at least.
It can be difficult sitting on the sidelines watching what is currently going on in Hong Kong. What message would you like to send to the international community? And what are some ways they can help?
Well, the international community could do right now is, I mean, first of all, to spread the news and let everyone know that what's happened in Hong Kong. There's still a lot of people who had no idea of what's happened in Hong Kong, and I try to uh, tell my Facebook friends or post on Instagram to those foreign friends what's happened in Hong Kong and tell them that there is such a huge thing happening in Hong Kong. And also support the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. It's a very important act that could punish those governors uh, who propose purposely damage the human rights in Hong Kong and the use of violence, which is really anti-human rights. And also, it try to govern the operation of one country, two system. And if it violate, there should be some kind of economical punishment. Also, if there's a protest raised by the Hong Kong people in your city, just support them. Tell them that they are doing the right thing, and tell them that you are supporting them. And also boycott China for very obvious reason. For example, restaurant operated by the pro-Chinese people don't use any kind of China invented apps, including WeChat and also TikTok, which I noticed that there are a lot of people been using TikTok in America or in the foreign countries. Um, I don't like the app at all because I don't like the design. I don't like the whole idea, and uh, and also it's from China, so you don't know whether your videos or your information is gonna send back to the server in China, which they already been doing it in the WeChat app. So your information is exposing when you are using WeChat, and that's very important.
I think it would be challenging to speak for everyone who was part of the protests, but what do you think is the overall vision for Hong Kong to be in the next couple of decades in terms of autonomy, knowing that it will be absorbed back into China in 2047?
Well, the the autonomy statement was never in one of the five demands. Actually, a lot of the protesters or a lot of citizens, um, what they try to say is that they don't want autonomy. Actually, they still want to be part of China, and that's why it's never in one of the five demands. But China or the China people, they've been accusing us that we want independence for the whole month in order to try to make those people in China to think that we are having a movement of independence. We want to betray our country, or we want to escape from China, which is not true at all. We've never said it in one of the five demands, and there are a lot of Chinese people outside their country, and they might be migrate to America or Canada or Britain, but they still support Chinese government. And when people ask them, like, it wasn't in five demands, so where do you receive that kind of information that the protesters want had to have independence? They can't even tell. So it's kind of the tricks by the Chinese government. But I mean, like so far right now, there's still not a voice for independence. But if the situation continued to be such worse, and the Chinese government wouldn't give us what we demand for, which are all like very reasonable demands, I don't know what's gonna happen. Maybe there will be a lot more voices for independence. It all depends on China. I mean, the one country two system is something that was written in the statement when uh, Hong Kong was returned to China from Britain. It's kind of like an experiment, and as one of the Hong Kong people, I sincerely hope that the one country two system could successfully perform, and to demonstrate to people in China, and also to demonstrate to the China government that such thing could work, and to bring the mindset of democracy back to China if one country two system was success. And the success of one country two system right now really relies on how the China government react on the incidents happen right now. It's really just depends on them.
Part of the protest, which I feel has been gaining more traction, is the topic of protecting one's own identity. Now, there is real fear amongst the protesters of their identities being exposed, which can be seen in recent incidents, such as the identities of flight crew being exposed for participating in the protests, which resulted in the flight crew being fired. Even more recently, protesters have taken to the streets wearing Guy Fawkes masks. As a result, the Chinese government has imposed an emergency ban on all masks at protests. Do you share this same concern in regards to fear of one's own identity being exposed?
Well, yeah, and right now there's still a very heavy kind of white terror atmosphere, and even like in protests with letter of no objection was issued, and the people will still wear masks because they don't want to expose their identity, and if they expose their identity, there might be a chance that the bosses or the colleagues were gonna say that out and gonna fire them, which happened a lot of times. Like the Cathay Pacific, which is the the airline and one of the airlines in Hong Kong, they've been fired like 5 or 6 air crews and also flight attendants because they participated in the protest, even it's a legal protest. And also, some were fired because they post a Facebook post which was only shown to the friends that they support the protest. Like one of the president of the labor union of the Cathay Pacific airline was fired because of this kind of reasons. And also for me, like I was in a field that I was required to go back to China a lot of times, and like recently the borders they've been setting up like cubes to try to just randomly check Hong Kong people's phone or to see whether they have brought any kind of information about the protests back to China. They're afraid that that those pieces of information are gonna share by China people and let the China people know what's happening in Hong Kong. So they would bring those people who got the information in their phone to the Black Cube and to ask them to never delete all the information and then they will record the identity and they will bring the persons to like a police station in China without any like proper boarding procedures, which was really terrifying. And I was really terrified by this. Like I have to switch, I have to buy a new phone with like no information, and I have to create a new Facebook account, new Instagram account, and like just kind of like having a fake identity. That shouldn't be happening because I was just going back to my country, and this shouldn't be a thing that I have to be fear of. But right now, the situation is like this. It's so worse that I have to kind of create a fake identity in China. I have to be silent about what's happening in Hong Kong so that I could be safe back to Hong Kong. But we still have to fight for what we want to have because it's a fight of democracy and also it's a fight for to protect ourselves from continuously under such kind of terror atmosphere.
And as a result of this, I mean, people have been leaning on encrypted channels such as Telegram for sharing their thoughts and strategies. Have you seen this firsthand? And if so, what kind of impact have you personally seen from it?
Well, I mean, a lot of platforms we use in the X, like Telegram that you mentioned, and also Link HKG, LHHG, I don't know how to pronounce it in English, but it's kind of like Reddit, but it's a Hong Kong version of Reddit, which was also used in the Umbrella movement, but right now is more used here. And it's really funny that like the pro China, they're like one of the pro China legislative councilors, Regina Ip, said that it's so advanced. The use of Telegram is so advanced, and hence that there must be some foreign involvement, like involvement from like foreign countries who taught like the protesters how to use Telegram. But really, like I mean, like Telegram is such a really, it's not like as common as WhatsApp, but I mean it's still like a very common app for communications in your phones. And is people like the elder people, they think that is really advanced. But like I've been joining a lot of Telegram groups, and really it just to sum up the contributions made by like every protesters, and also it's really not that difficult to open a Telegram like channels or something. It's more of like to sum up all the informations and to just post it. So it does require some kind of human forces, but I mean it's just very simple applications. And a lot of times we've been using telegrams and also mostly telegrams for receiving informations to know like where's the police coming, and also has any police released any kind of weapons or use tear gas or not, and where is not safe, where is safe, where should we escape, like what kind of roads we have to use to, in order to escape from the police. Uh, yeah, we've been using Telegram for these kind of purposes, which is I don't think is like so difficult, so advanced that we need some kind of people to teach us. I mean, like we live in Hong Kong for like 20 something years. The Hong Kong people are really good at adapting, so it just it just skills. I mean, like I have no further comment on those pro-Chinese people.
Compared to the 2014 umbrella protest, which peaked at 100,000 protesters at any given time, the 2019 Extradition Bill protest has peaked at over 2 million protesters, which is the highest number in any protest in the history of Hong Kong. What are the biggest challenges that are faced when protesting at such a scale? And what has it been like to be involved with the 2014 umbrella protests and the 2019 extradition bill protests?
Well, for me, like one of the biggest challenges compared to 2014 and also 2019 is that the chances of being arrested and being unlawful treated by the police has been increased like a ton. And also, we're ready to be using like forces against the police because the situation has gone like so bad, and we've seen like uh, so many violence performed by the police, and we have to fight with them. We have to survive from them, and that's why we have to use like the forces. And also, I mean, like the umbrella movement when we were trying to occupy Central, is mostly it was like staying in Central or in MOT, and also the government that time was much more peaceful, like and so-called peaceful because um, we they were not trying to like using like many kind of violent act at least at the beginning of the occupying. But right now, this we could see like batons and also pepper spray and also tear gas and also a lot of violent forces have been using. And also when they arrest you, they will we don't really know like what kind of treatment they would do on you. And there are a lot of rumors saying that the police have been killing like some protesters and they've been raped or some kind of female protesters, some female protesters, or a lot of sexual harassment has been used. Like at least for the part of sexual harassment, we've been seeing it a lot of times, and there are a lot of female protesters who step up and say the police have been sexual harassing them. So it's much more dangerous to do compared to the umbrella movement in 2014. And also, the stance from the government was stronger because it's an issue related to China. So we could expect, like everyone could expect, like the stand could be much stronger. And we have learned a lesson from umbrella movement that you just can't accept what the government has said, and we have to stay strong and hold our belief. We have to stay clear that the five demands should be passed at once, and we don't want anyone less, which is a really big challenge because we anticipate that the government is not gonna accept like the remaining four. So it's a very kind of like a very long term fight instead of a very like 10 days or 20 days. So it's kind of suffering like for us right now because most of the people they work 9 to 5 in the weekdays, and in the weekends we go protest. So it's kind of really exhausting. Is we have to put a lot of focus in it, which kind of really affects the social lives and all kind of stuff, but is something that we have to do.
Now, as part of the two system, one country form of government between China and Hong Kong, the regions would have their own currencies, economic, and legal systems. But defense and diplomacy would be decided by Beijing. What level of autonomy are Hong Kong citizens looking for? Complete independence or continued autonomy?
I think like about like the complete independence, like I mentioned previously, we never said that we want complete independence. Uh, well, we do want dual universal suffrage, which was written in one of our five demands, and also written in the basic law. It's Chinese commitment to Hong Kong that they are gonna give us. They are gonna permit us to have a dual universal suffrage, which everyone in Hong Kong, every Hong Kong legal citizens, they could have a right to vote for our chief executive, which right now we do not. So we want that. We want to vote for our chief executive. We don't want like the China government elects for us to give us some people first and then we select from them. We don't want that. So at least I feel like at least this is what we want. I don't know what's that called independence or not because it's clearly written in the basic law. But I mean like after that, I don't think there's like a very common ground or very common things or common agreements among the protesters or even the Hong Kong citizens that what we are going to do after 2047, which marks the end of one country, two system. Right now it's still leaving blank, but I mean, if we see that the situation gonna continue to be worse, I'm not surprised to see that more and more people in Hong Kong will fight for a complete independence for Hong Kong.
Tiananmen Square is widely known for the 1989 June 4th incident, in which a pro democracy protest was violently cracked down on by the Chinese government. Do you feel that there are any parallels between the current situation in Hong Kong and the Tiananmen Square protests 30 years ago?
Well, do see like some kind of similarities, like the Tiananmen Square protest was formed initially by the students, but right now is amongst the Hong Kong citizens, but they do also do fight for justice. As for the results, at the end of the Tiananmen Square incidents, um, tanks were entered into the students and also the protesters, and uh, blood was bleeding, and also the tanks were killing people. I certainly hope that that won't happen in Hong Kong, but like to be serious, I have no idea what Chinese government is gonna do. They may they may send tanks here as well. We've seen like tanks appearing in Hong Kong during the protests. We've seen like couple times. Which but it wasn't like during the protest, but rather like very early, like 6 or 5 a.m. We don't know what they are for, but I certainly don't hope that the case in Tiananmen Square happened here again, especially like Hong Kong has attained like so many focus from the world, and also as one of the Hong Kong people, I don't want any of my buddies to be injured or even died because of fighting for justice, fighting for what we think we should have.
Considering that Chief Executive Carrie Lam announced a formal withdrawal of the extradition bill, what would you say is the legitimacy behind the current protest as the initial demand was met?
Well, certainly not. We still got like four demands which I've been repeatedly staying in, and also Hong Kong people has been repeatedly staying for the whole time. We want all five demands at once. We don't want less. It's our minimum stance. If Carrie Lam or the Hong Kong government can't even give us all the five promises, we wouldn't agree with the government and we still continue to protest and we will still continue to fight for it. And in fact, um, what Carrie Lam said about withdraw the bill is that she said in her official speech that she's gonna propose to withdraw. So it means that right now it's still not been withdrawn yet. It's still not withdrawn yet. And if we accept it right now already, there still might be chance that like when the legislative council um, was start processing, um, she might not to withdraw the bill. So that could happen. We still have to wait to see whether she really um, perform her promises. So we won't step back just because she said she's gonna withdraw the bill. Like, come on. It's been like almost 3 months, almost 100 days, and she's acting so worse. Like we've all know that this was not the end. Like withdrawing the bill is not the end, and it's the tactics that she been used. And I've mentioned it previously that a lot of things she's been doing that pretend to be the weaker side is her most used tactics to try to fool people. And we might be fooled by her a lot of times, but this time we won't be fooled.
So, October 1st represents the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China, as much as it's also the celebration of the Communist Party. As we approach this date, do you feel that Chairman Xi will be obligated to quell the protests at all costs so as to avoid drawing a shadow on such an important day?
Well, Yeah, certainly. Like October 1st is such a big day, but right now the government has been canceling the fireworks in Hong Kong. I do believe like the China government would suppress like all news in Hong Kong about the protests in order to trying to create a picture that there is so peaceful in Hong Kong, or the so-called rioters like us was has been suppressed by the Chinese government and there's nothing happened. But the protesters have been planning to protest during the day and also the 29th of September, which I guess like a lot of the countries, there are different people who against the Communist Party in Hong Kong will also go on a protest as well to try to tell other people that how bad the Communist Party is, especially the China government. So let's see what will happen during the day. And I could anticipate that it's gonna be a big day, not just for like the Chinese people, but also for the protesters, because we are gonna do something big.
Well, Alex, it's going to be really interesting to see how things play out, especially with the upcoming 70th anniversary of the People's Republic of China. Now, I believe that there are a lot of eyes on Hong Kong right now, not because of civil unrest or because of the protests, but because the actions by the citizens of Hong Kong deeply resonate with many around the world. Joshua Wong said it best when he mentioned, "We are not seeking revolution, we just want democracy." That said, before we go, I wanted to turn it over to you for any final closing thoughts that you would like to share about your personal experiences as well as the protests in Hong Kong. Thank you again.
Well, thanks, Tasha, for having me on the show. I would like to add like final thoughts is that well, it's almost 100 days from the very beginning of the anti-extradition bill movement, and we're still fighting for it. And we don't know what it's gonna end. We want it to end at the best, but we still don't know. Like a lot of people have been sacrificed in the movement. There are 9 people has already suicide, and we don't know like how many people were killed by the police. But we'll still fight for what we think is right, and I feel like that's what we're trying to do, and that's fight for freedom. And I certainly hope that the foreign countries or countries besides China could support us. So I hope that everyone who's been hearing the podcast could help to show some support to Hong Kong, just simply like support the protests about the extradition bill, and also to say some words to support them that could help us a lot. Finally, I would like to thank Texture again to invite me in the show.